Alright, what's up everybody? So it's a little hard to believe, isn't it? God of War Ragnarok is actually only 2 months away from releasing. It's of course one of the biggest games, probably the biggest PlayStation 5 exclusive so far. Easily my most anticipated game at the moment. And, you know, like, the marketing trajectory, I guess, a lot of people have been asking questions about it, have been calling it very strange. And strange is definitely... you know, I would say a right way to put it. Minimalistic might be the better way to do so. I will say that I was thinking back about it, and that's where I suddenly realized it really hadn't been all that different for the original game. You might recall that, of course, the God of War reboot, or whatever you want to call it, was announced at E3 2016. It then took a full year before we saw something from the game again, which was that story kind of trailer that we got then at E3 2017, and even all the way up until March 2018, which was 2 months prior to that game's release, we still didn't have a good idea what the game was even going to play like. Of course, it was originally revealed with a gameplay demo, but that very much differed from what the final product actually ended up looking like. And I recall it very vividly simply because I went to this Sony event, played the first 2 hours of the game, and I had to tell people about what the actual controls for it were and stuff, right? And like everybody was super... well, that was essentially the first time we truly got to see gameplay. They decided to tackle it in a very similar way back then too, by having the press kind of, dive into it all, especially because I think people also had many concerns still in the way that it differed so much, obviously, from the original God of War games. And at the time, people were arguing about, you know, the lack of a jump button and all that stuff, remember? It's, I don't know, it's already giving me some nostalgic vibes just thinking back about it, and it's only been, like, what, 4.5 years, but... here we are. Like I said, God of War Ragnarok is on the brink of release, and, the way that they're doing it this time around, where they're actually showing us gameplay, not through a state of play, not through an actual own event, no, they decided to take Game Informer, out of all places, to give us these snippets of gameplay randomly. So it was a couple of days ago that they released 1.5 minutes of gameplay, and apparently there's still going to be a little bit coming up, you know, in a couple days from now, which... again, it's just so strange, right? Because you know, I remember literally being there in that chat with thousands of very excited people to finally see something of it, because we literally hadn't for so long, and then it ended up being less than 2 minutes, and everybody was like, "Wait, that's it?" And especially combined with the fact, of course, that I think what we're seeing of the gameplay so far, it's nothing that necessarily blows people away. I had a very similar vibe coming off of that trailer that we got about a year ago at the PlayStation Showcase, where the first time that I saw it, I was hyped as hell, because this is literally, you know, again, this is that game that we've been waiting for years, the sequel to what was easily one of the most well-received PS4 exclusives last generation, right? We were all hyped, but I do think that the more I actually ended up watching that trailer, rewatching it, I should say, and trying to get the details out of it, the less sort of excited it made me about the final product, because I just started to realize, oh wait, this does look very similar to the original game, doesn't it? And of course we had heard at the time already how the game was also coming to PlayStation 4, wasn't going to be this, you know, exclusive to this generation only, which gave people a lot of concerns about, okay, does that mean that it won't be optimized well for the current gen, and that the last gen is essentially going to be holding it back, right? All very valid concerns, and I do think that then with the trailer that was presented to us, while story-wise it certainly looked very exciting, in terms of gameplay and in terms of graphics overall, I would say it just kind of seemed like a God of War 1.5. It seemed like it could have been sort of an expansion for the original game. Now, actually analyzing then what it is that we received very recently, a little glimpse at the changes that they've made in terms of combat, you can tell that they've done a lot of these little optimizations, I would say, to just, to just add a little bit more dynamic to the combat overall, where, for example, they talked about the triangle button that was, of course, previously always used to retract the axe. I mean, that was a single... you know, motion that you pulled off every now and then, that they solely reserved to a button, right? So they essentially figured like, okay, we can use it for a little bit more. So now you can apparently like sort of infuse your either your axe or your blades of chaos, and it will kind of, you know, like give it some special effect. that seems alright. They've made changes to the shield, for example, where you can actually have different kinds this time around. So there's apparently like the Dauntless one, which is very much focused on people who or very much meant for people, I guess, who like using, or who like parrying, which is definitely me. That was by far my favorite thing to do in the previous game, was to just parry an attack from an opponent at the last possible second, and then literally just, you know, punching it back in his face, apparently. Such a satisfying move. So the Dauntless Shield is apparently going to kind of capitalize on that particular style of playing, which is definitely then what I will be leaning towards. But you also have these Stonewall shields that, you know, look much more, I guess, square-shaped or something. You can't really parry with them, you just use them to block attacks, and then it essentially sort of like stores up a bunch of energy with all the attacks, I guess, that you block, and then at some point you can use that to sort of, you know, throw it back in enemies' faces and just kind of slam it to the ground or whatever and hit a bunch of people all at the same time. At the same time, what I do definitely notice in terms of gameplay is that they've done a lot with the movement. So, you know, Kratos actually can use his Blaze of Chaos now to grapple onto platforms. I love how literally every single game seems to be having some kind of grappling hook function nowadays. I don't know, to me it's just so satisfying to use these kinds of agile moves, right? But at the same time, we see that yeah, I don't know, environments seem to be set up a little bit more to be these arenas that you can kind of hover around, and I guess, you know, run around and sort of like jump from platform to platform. So we see Kratos doing that all the time now. I'm still pretty sure that there's not an actual jump button in the way that you can do it every single time when you want to or whatever, but it really is still as simple as like hitting the circle button, I guess, to, you know, go from platform to platform. But you just see that there are much more occasions where you'll want to be actually using that. So, you know, all those things, it's nice to see, but it's obviously not a game changer or something either, right? And I think that's just like the big realization that that I've had, is that in certain ways, God of War Ragnarok is undoubtedly going to feel, I don't know if underwhelming would be the right way of putting it, but it's not gonna feel necessarily like a generational leap kind of thing, right? Again, in terms of graphics, I absolutely do think that the environments look a little crispier. They have added detail for sure. If you just look at the richness, I guess, of the environments, it's there, absolutely, but it's not. And I think this is just like such a conversation that we've heard so many times, where every single generation people complain how the leap is getting smaller. And I think once again, it's just the reality of the situation, where this is not that leap that we saw from, say, Uncharted 3 to 4 or something, right? It's not going to be that for these God of War games. You know, and again, in terms of combat, like, I have no doubt in my mind we're going to eventually get even more weapons added to the arsenal. Like, I don't know, maybe Kratos ends up getting Thor's hammer at some point down the line, right? Or any other type of weapon will be added to it that will bring a bit more dynamic, and, you know, you're gonna have to use it in your environment too, not just in combat. But again, these are not things that will suddenly change the game around in its entirety or something, right? The formula is there. The groundwork has been laid with that original game, and it's very much what the second game is then going to still be relying on, at least for a long time. Now, this is where I do want to get into sort of like the point of this video, I would almost say, and the thing that I've just been thinking about a lot, because so far, I would very much then also describe my sentiment as like, I have no doubt in my mind God of War Ragnarok is going to be absolutely fantastic, right? It's gonna be a great game. If it literally does the exact same things that the original did, except with a new story, but in the same setting, with you know, a quality of storytelling that's just as great, with combat that is just as great because not much has changed about it, then of course you're getting a great product, right? But I do think that when you're talking about these kinds of conversations that people love to have in the gaming community about Game of the Years and you know, all these, especially that conversation, I guess, people always tend to look for something that surprises them, right? And the big question then is, with God of War Ragnarok, is the surprise factor going to be there? I myself wasn't necessarily convinced that it would be having that yet, right? But the more I'm starting to think about it, the more I do definitely feel like they are purposefully not showing us much of this game whatsoever, and they are going to have these big surprises in store. Logically, it also just doesn't make sense to think about the fact that this game has been in development for almost, I think it is 4.5 years, yeah, since the original the first God of War. It continues to be hard calling it the first God of War when you know it's not the first, but you get what I'm saying, right? But that one came out in, I think it was May 2018, so it's been 4.5 years since. Again, the engine is there, all that stuff. Like, it took them actually about this same time span to go from God of War Ascension to God of War 2018, having a different IP cancelled in the process, having to lay that groundwork, build the new engine, come up with these completely new gameplay systems for a God of War game that was going to differ so much and be essentially a restart from the series overall. They are taking the same amount of time now for this Ragnarok game, right? But that has to show in some kind of ways. And this is the thing, it's not doing that yet. And I think, once again, that is simply because it's going to surprise us in some areas. So first of all, the way that you can tell that it will is simply looking at the premise of this game. They announced it already a year ago with that trailer, but God of War Ragnarok will actually be the last game in the Norse mythology, right? Everybody had kind of figured out like, oh, they're probably going to be doing another trilogy, or maybe even more than that, right? I mean, the Greece setting essentially got 6 games, so go figure. Here, they said, now we're just gonna leave it here. What that suddenly sets us up with is so much potential for what they're going to be doing with the story here, right? We are going to have so many characters that we're going to be dealing with. I mean, not only think about the gods like Thor, but this means that we're going to get Odin in the mix for sure as well, right? We're still going to have Freya that we're going to be dealing with and was obviously shown in that trailer. All these questions that we had kind of figured like, okay, the series is eventually going to get around to it, but it could be kind of like by the end of it, where we saw that prophecy on the mural with Kratos supposedly dying, right? Is that going to happen? All these theories that we had with the World Serpent, where some people even thought that it could be Kratos. The tease alone of Atreus being Loki, the god of mischief, right? So much is to be done there. Suddenly we start realizing all of this is going to happen in this one single game. That's huge. That means that there is, once again, so much potential for the directions this is going to be going in. I think very much, actually, that God of War Ragnarok will be focused more than ever on Atreus. And once again, it is because of that tease of him being Loki. It's also because the one other character that got kind of introduced to us, Angerboda, right? Who, well, we know that in Norse mythology is kind of one of Loki's mates, and they actually have children, one of them being the World Serpent. So that's all going to tie in some kind of way. Well, actually, Atreus also being very much in that trailer, so eager to find out about his identity and essentially seeming to be sort of the cause for the journey this time around, where Kratos seems very reluctant, right? All of these things are setting up something huge. Now, at the same time, of course, we know that just kind of thinking about the criticisms that the previous game had, it was kind of those boss battles and stuff, right? People thought that there just weren't that many in them. You know, you had kind of the mini bosses in terms of the trolls, which just kind of kept being repeated over and over again. But then the real boss battles was definitely something that I feel the original game still sort of struggled with. Also because it just had these new mechanics, and boss battles didn't really seem to be that, yeah, I don't know, like they had a hard time figuring out how they were going to tackle it. You had them more in the classic, I guess, Dark Souls style, because it was very much the combat system that they implemented. So that's where the Valkyries came into play, right? And those were great, but those were more classical, I guess. Whereas the actual story-driven boss battles, what they ended up becoming is just these encounters that essentially played out very scripted, which I don't think anything is wrong with. But then, you know, just think about like the Stranger fight in the very beginning. It just placed you kind of constantly in these arenas, right? So the Stranger boss battle was essentially 3 arenas that you kept fighting him in, with then a bunch of scripted stuff happening in between. You saw that very much too with the final boss fight there too. Once again, I don't know if there's truly a way that they can tackle it much better than that, in all fairness. I just think that overall it's going to be a little bit more, these explosive moments and these super over-the-top scripted set-piece type situations are just gonna be able to be featured more in the game, because they also just take a lot of time to produce, you know what I mean? And that's the thing, they were very limited and scattered across the campaign of the original game. I feel like they're gonna be in this one way more. We also know, for example, that we still have a bunch of realms that still need to be visited. A lot of them were actually already accessible in the first game, but you know, Svartalfheim, which is where the dwarves, I think, are supposed to be, right? That's still gonna have to be explored. Vanaheim, which has a lot of potential because it's kind of looked at this super strange realm, right? Where, yeah, I don't know how they're exactly going to portray it, but it's certainly going to be something very different from all the other ones. And then there is obviously Asgard, which is where all the you know, the gods once again come into play. There is so much potential. When I look at the one and only trailer we have seen of the game so far, and just keeping all of these things in the back of my head, I really start to realize how it only scratched the surface of this game. I think it's super clear, honestly. That trailer focused on the first couple hours of the game and that's it. It's gonna have this super slow, smooth kind of start, where suddenly you find yourself you know, basically back in Midgard, right? And everything is frozen, and you can already tell that, like, suddenly you can actually use your sled to kind of just navigate the lake and stuff the way you used to in your boat. The environments has changed around them, right? And they kind of, you know, Kratos and Atreus start visiting these other places that still very much look kind of like the original game, you know, the place where they encounter Tyr, and where you have those weird frog-like monsters or whatever they are. It all seemed so familiar, and in terms of environment, in terms of just what you're seeing from the game, also once again the combat. But I am just so convinced that, taking in mind everything this game actually has on its plate to do, it's going to be massive. Not only do I think it's going to be so much larger in terms of sheer amount of content, I guess, than the first game, which to me isn't, and I always talk about these things, but it's not even necessarily that big of a deal. I don't mind if a game is long or short, as long as the content that's there is quality, of course. I do just overall think they're going to have so much more at offer here with this game in particular. But then, at the same time, I would not be surprised if there is going to be that kind of twist, where you know, I know some people are a little bit hesitant about it because they kind of start thinking about a Last of Us 2 type situation where the game changes around drastically and Kratos dies and all these things, right? Let's be honest, the first game kind of did already tease that potentially happening, right? It doesn't have to happen, but, you know, I truly do believe that Santa Monica kind of realizes that if they're just gonna remake essentially that first game once again and add a couple of things here and there and just give it to you like that, they're not going to get the same reception to it, right? Question is, do they mind? As long as the game sells, that's fine, of course, but at the same time, I would not be surprised if all this time, with the 4.5 years of development time that's gone into this game, already having the engine, like I said, and already essentially having everything set up, even having the story largely kind of written already. Like Cory Barlog talked about that a lot, right? Where when they wrote the script for the first game, they essentially already knew where they were going to end it. They already had set up all these teasers. You know, who was it that blew the horn and stuff when Kratos was you know, on the elevator, giving, trying to give Atreus to Freya and stuff for her to heal him. All these things, like, it was all there. And so what I start to automatically sort of think and I guess fantasize about is like, what is it that they're hiding from us? Because I think truly that they are hiding a lot of stuff from us right now. It's also why I'm just going to be honest about it. Although the footage so far, again, I'll be the very first to say it doesn't look incredibly exciting where I'm like, oh man, I can't wait. I'm not worried about it either. I feel like truly they're going to do a couple of things in this game that we just won't see coming. And what that is of course the big question. Could it be Atreus kind of, you know, taking over as the main character or something? Is that a possibility? Could we play as like a different god? Probably not, but you know, like, what is going to happen to Kratos, right? Again, I don't even think that if he ends up dying in the middle portion of the game, right, and suddenly we take over as Atreus, if that happens, we'll get completely different gameplay. Keep that in mind, right? So this is once again where they're going to change these systems around. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that Kratos still ends up being dead by the end of the game, for example, but I can definitely see there is, again, like, we are being misled in some kind of way. That's my personal hunch feeling. I could be entirely wrong about it, and this could just be the sequel, the way they are presenting it, right? And I think for a large or for a significant duration of the game, it will be that kind of sequel. Doesn't mean it has to stay that way. I think that's the thing to be looking out for, where in the first game we had that twist of the Blades of Chaos finally being presented to us and kind of changing the game up, and, you know, like marking phase 2, I guess, for the first God of War game there. I can see a very similar situation happening with this, is what I'm trying to say. And I'm very excited to find out if that's true, what that's actually going to end up being. So for now, guys, I want to know from you all, how are you feeling about God of War Ragnarok for now? What do you think about the way that they're marketing it? I'm sure, again, and this is just maybe the one conversation that I should be ending on, although I totally understand the impatience that people have, I also simply think that it's just a sign of the times. Like, it's not necessary for these companies to start promoting their games heavily years out, because we live in such a social media generation right now where everybody has incredibly short attention spans. You know, people in the first place, most of the purchases they make are completely on impulse, let's be honest. It's kind of pointless to show off your game so much. And not only, of course, are you kind of spoiling us already in advance by a bunch of stuff, which is what a lot of games have fallen victim to. At the same time, it's not necessary, because all they need to do is just show us a bunch of stuff, which they will. They absolutely will be showing us a bunch more stuff in the coming 2 months leading up to the launch of the game. That's the thing. We're gonna get, for sure, a new trailer. We're gonna get more extended gameplay footage. We're going to get everything that we want from the game. It's just not, you know, it just didn't happen as early as we had wanted to. I really think that that's the conclusion of it all. But for now, guys, like I said, let me know all your thoughts in the comments. I hope you enjoyed my video. Of course, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. I will very much be trying to give more frequent updates once again on gaming. So if you're looking forward to that, then yeah, I'm happy to hear that, of course. And once again, subscribe to make sure that you stay tuned for all of that. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you back in the next video.